open it. Questions, comments,
Yeah.
Nancy. If you don't hear clearly, Sarah, say so after she finishes. Go ahead.
Give it to Todd.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good.
I'll get this down sometime near the end of this lifetime. Go ahead.
It's a question about the term fulfill.
Yes, which you raised last time. Go ahead.
But more and more,
Okay.
I realize, that prophecy is not prediction.
Right, exactly. Oh, yes, that's a good thing to raise. That's correct.
And that fulfill has something to do with that. And when it says that prophecy is fulfilled, or all the other ways in which something is fulfilled.
For example, I think it's in today's reading that the law is fulfilled, isn't it? In Matthew,
Yeah.
I think that's very important emphasis there.
Yeah.
That Jesus says, "I come not to change the law, whatever. In fact, if anything, not to change one iota of the law," is
Yes.
what he would say in Greek, and does say in Greek. Not one tittle of the law, which, by the way, in a Hebraic context is very important, because in the Hebraic culture, every letter, literally, of the scriptures is significant, right? But let's go back to your question. So fulfillment.
Let me just connect one other thing with the question, and that is with the law. So it's like following the law. That the letter of the law, it's not just the letter as opposed to the spirit, but that following it, it's like it's in the past, and then I'm in some sense separate from it. So fulfilling the law is something else, so that I connect with prophecy and fulfillment. So anyway, help me.
I'll try and help you. I don't think any of these are easy questions with easy answers.
I got that,
but the way I would understand it, what came to mind while you're asking the question, which I think is something of a profound pun here, is that when Jesus speaks about fulfilling the law, he's fleshing it out.
Yes.
All right. So there is some kind of in the law, you see, there is as it were, a foreshadowing of its perfect fulfillment. In other words, that you could almost say, now that you got me going on this, and we're jumping the gun, but it's okay. The law makes a demand, right? The law makes a demand upon the, in this case, the observant Jew, or all Jews actually, whether or not they observe, and no one, when we get to Paul, this becomes a central issue in Romans. The problem with the law is that no one is justified by the law because no one actually fulfills the law. Now, Paul understands, of course, apart from what is referred to in Matthew, apart from Jesus, who does fulfill the law, all right, but he is the only one who fulfills the law. It goes back to Alan's question a couple of weeks ago about the perfect nature of this perfect person, that is particularly meaning the perfect human nature, which is not, as it were, spoiled in any way by this person, because this person happens to be a divine person. In my language, I don't use the word I use the word absolute in the appendix to Beyond Sovereignty, which came up in our questions class a year ago. The members of the Trinity are understood in the thinking now occurring to be absolute persons, but that'll easily substitute here for perfect persons. And as perfect persons, the assumption by one of them of human nature does not in any way introduce any kind of imperfection into that human nature. So Jesus, qua man, is able to fulfill the law, to enflesh it, I want to say, perfectly, right? So I think fulfillment has that notion of perfection, and also it has the notion of completion, right? In other words, there's something lacking to the law up until it is fulfilled in the person of Jesus. What's lacking to it is, it's kind of a circle. What's lacking to the law up until that point is precisely its perfect fulfillment. I mean, it's redundant.
Right.
It's realization, maybe another way of putting it. Yeah.
Right. So if this is not, if fulfillment is not prediction or the
Yes.
satisfying, what can you say about time there?
Well, see, this is interesting on a number of levels. Now, the problem I have, when I taught the American philosophy course, I don't know whether I mentioned to you in class, but I had a problem because until I taught American philosophy in this context, I had taught it in a normal university setting. And in a normal university setting, when I teach American philosophy, I don't talk about the thinking now occurring. I talk about American philosophy, period. And so, but that didn't last very long in here because everybody here is looking at everything somehow or other through the lens of thinking now occurring. And it took me several weeks to adjust to that in that course, which I think I did to my own satisfaction. The reason I'm mentioning that now is that I have not the same unease or hesitation in this course as in that, because this subject matter, the New Testament, is explicitly a ground of the thinking now occurring insofar as it is the scriptural embodiment, at least, of the incarnation. Right? So I don't have, on the other hand, I do have an analogous hesitation whenever I speak now, because I want to, my intellectual and pedagogical conscience is always tempting me to distinguish what I might say to you in the context of the thinking now occurring about time from what I might say is, as it were, understood in the text as it stands. You understand the distinction I'm trying to make? And I'm not sure it's easy for me to do that. So I raise that issue. I raise it just to make you sensitive to the fact that you should take everything I say with a grain of salt. All right. Having said all of that, since I have applied the notion of X beyond X, or Y, to be more clear, Y beyond X, as a logical framework for understanding a lot of what we're coming across, first and foremost heavily in the Gospel of John, and then again repeated a little less heavily, but also there, as I think I will. I don't know that I actually got to it last time, but I hope to today in Mark. This notion that when the way I did it, I think it was in John, when Jesus, when he picks out, when he chooses out the disciples from the world. I was saying in the Greek we have that double ek, that double out, and then I am taking the Heideggerian-like bold step of asserting that the proper way to so I put all those hedges around it just so you guys don't get in trouble when you're talking to your friends. I'm saying the double ek, properly understood here, should be understood not in the ordinary way it's translated, but as a double beyond. All right, so that the disciples are gathered beyond the world, you see, meaning not simply beyond the world. And we did hit on this last time, I think, in the Gospel of Mark, where they're not taken out of the world. And he explicitly says, I do not pray to the Father to take you out of the world, right? He leaves them in the world, and they are to suffer, in fact, in a way which is a corollary of the way in which he suffers personally, which raises a whole other interesting set of issues which Paul will bring our attention to explicitly. Okay, so in that sense, so now when I'm saying beyond the world, I'm thinking, again, I don't even like the word anymore, now that I'm doing the thinking now occurring, as it were, spatial terms, right, terms of distance. But the same principle, in other words, beyond the world is not outside of the world in any kind of distant sense, you see, and analogously, temporally, all right. In fact, it came up, I think it was last time when maybe it was in John. You can understand how the Gospels run together, at least in my head. Either in John or in Mark, where he's talking to the woman at the well, and he makes the point about you're expecting the Messiah, who is, yes, he's coming, but I'm here. Okay, that non-alternative between what if we weren't doing the thinking now occurring, we would casually say is a future event. Do you say? But there is no future.
Yeah.
There is a coming. There is some kind of distinction in the what I call the absolute now between Jesus' being there at the well with that woman and saying of himself that he is the Messiah that she's expecting, and at the same time that is to be distinguished from the coming of the Messiah. What to us in an either-or frame of mind, either-or logic would seem to be a contradiction, you see, is not only let stand, but it's reiterated throughout the gospel, right? So I'm saying, I think I'm trying to answer your question. So let me just say my punchline when I was doing the critique of that, or the analysis or the exegesis of that particular passage, I formulated it as the hour. This is the hour. This is the time. So now I'll wrap this into your question. If the hour that we're talking about is the hour of fulfillment, if this is the kairos that Jesus announces, this is that the time is accomplished, the kingdom of heaven is near, repent and receive the good news, etc., all that business. That kairos, which in Greek means it's translated. See, it's only one word in Greek, okay? It's translated the critical time, or sometimes the appointed time, you see? So this would be the time appointed for the fulfillment of whatever you're referring to, all right? That time, I'm saying that hour is beyond now.
Yeah.
And so, just to make sure, right? So even though I don't like to think this way, if you're coming at the question because you have this notion that there's such a thing as a future in mind, well, you must probably, I guess you have a notion as a past. So when I say this hour is beyond now, I mean not only in that direction, but I mean in that direction.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah.
So in that sense, prophecy is talking about what is, allowing for that distinction within the now in which the prophet speaks,
yes,
between what is at least analogous to Jesus being at the well and coming again, probably coming anothen from above, from beyond. Right? Okay. That's the best I can do for the moment. Are there any questions, other questions or comments? Or
I have a question.
Waltraud?
I grew up in a non-religious household.
Which puts you at a great advantage here.
Well, so I have to ask basic questions.
Well, I love them. Those are my favorite questions. Go ahead.
What is salvation?
That's a great question. Did you get that, Sarah?
I did, and he uses, I was going to ask you that too, because he says the people who are sick, he says, you're saved.
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. And I mentioned the short answer to the question is salvation is health. Now, of course, we have to expand our minds here, right? In other words, it's health of what we might be tempted to call us Cartesians, you see, of both mind and body, and more fundamentally, health of what, if we're going to make a further distinction, which Paul will make, of body and mind and spirit. Okay? So we were talking about what sin is. Now, there are many ways of slicing the answer to that question, but in the context of Waltraud's question, sin would be being sick, right? Being sick. And of course, it's understood in the tradition that our physical and mental sicknesses are somehow or other not at all unrelated, somehow or other consequences like death of the general spiritual sickness, you might say, that ensues upon the fall of Adam and Eve. All right, so the fundamental meaning, and along these lines, I think there's an allusion in one of the footnotes in one of the Gospels we've already read to Christ uses the word peace, right? Which in Greek would be eirene, but which is just a translation of the Hebrew, which we're all familiar with, and the Arabic for that matter, shalom. Okay, but the root idea of shalom is be well. Do you see? it has the notion of wholeness and healthiness. I'm introducing the word health because it's more vivid, I think, in English. Right? To be healthy, to be whole, to be in good shape. Right? So the human race is understood up until the incarnation to be sick, in need of a doctor. He says, the doctor doesn't come to heal those who are well, but those who are sick, you see. So sin is being sick. Salvation is being made whole. It's getting the peace of God returned to humanity.
And since incarnation? You said up to incarnation, the world seemed to be sick. And since incarnation, or at the point of incarnation, or after what?
Okay, it gets a little complicated. Humanity is saved in the person of Jesus, and those who receive him, who believe in him, to use the language of the text, right? They receive that salvation which I want to say he embodies it, you see, and if you're embodied in that which embodies salvation, then you are qua embodied in the Savior, right? You're embodied in the embodiment of health, for want of a better term. Then you're cured, okay? And if you refuse that, then you remain sick, and no, but it's worse than that. We touched on that before. If you refuse the gift of the Spirit, and that comes up again, I think, maybe in Mark again. I don't know if we got to it. If you refuse forgiveness, then you suffer the second death, right? In other words, you suffer not only the physical death, which is understood in this context to be the residuum, that's my use of the Latin, the residual in English, the residual or the residuum of the fall. The effects of the fall continue in the body until the resurrection of the dead. But in the meantime, in death, there's a whole lot of issues here, you understand? But we'll go through it rough. Each one of these things we could spend an hour on, but just to give you the framework, since you're coming from this irreligious background, in death you suffer, when you die, if you are in Christ, then you are with God, with Christ in God, and if you are not with Christ, then you are you suffer the second death. That is, you suffer judgment in the language of the text.
Which is hell.
Which is hell, yeah. Okay. Which is essentially, now what hell is imagistically is one thing. What hell is essentially, it's the separation of final and permanent, as it were, separation from God. Sarah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Nancy?
So I'm just trying to think how to say something about how it seems circular. I mean, I know it isn't, but so sin before the incarnation as a sickness, a lack of wholeness, a lack of health, and after. So in a sense, how does that show itself? Except, I'm going to ask a dumb question.
No,
except
fine.
with the idea that comes with the incarnation, that the only way to be saved is through Christ. So how does that show itself? Does it make sense to people to be called sinners and we're going to be saved at that? I mean, I don't understand how that's understood. Again, this is odd. I mean,
No. It's an excellent question, but Alan.
Does your question also relate to time and the resurrection?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I could give one easy way of answering that question. Partially answering that question is Augustine considers that question, and Augustine's answer is that with the saving act of Jesus, which is the sacrifice of the lamb, in this kind of, for want of a better term, universal Passover, you say, that he is the unspotted lamb, the perfect lamb. He perfectly atones for sin. He is therefore the savior of mankind. Augustine would say the immediate consequence of that is that when you die and you're embodied in Christ, my language, you go to heaven. You go to heaven. You see God face to face. The fact that you still die, you see, which would be a consequence of the fall, understood to be a consequence of the fall, is, I'm speaking in an Augustinian way of looking at it now, is a temporary situation. Your body, this is fundamental to Christianity, your body will be raised on the last day, and your soul and your body. See, the reason I'm going so slow here is that all of these are loaded terms that need to be explicated historically and logically, okay? But just running through it, in traditional terms, the resurrection of the body at the end of the world is the body's getting in on what your spirit, your soul, already experiences as if you believe in Jesus, right? Now, believe here is not simply a matter, I think we made that clear, certainly in the Gospels, not simply a matter of intellectual assent. You say it is a complete openness to the love of God as embodied in the incarnate Word. Now, I just wanted to finish that thought, going back to Augustine, since I'm using him as a way to avoid answering a complete answer to the question. If you said you said to Augustine, well, why can't we do both at once, right? Augustine's answer now, I have to be careful here, there's historical context, is that Augustine understands the soul to be, and he wasn't alone in this, right? This is the whole tradition, immaterial, purely spirit, therefore in itself not in some way transcending time, if I can put it that way, right? Yeah. Right. Whereas the body is obviously what we would call, and he would probably call, I don't know whether he used the term space, but temporal spatial entity. And so he understands that the fact that the salvation of your body is going to take an indefinite amount of time, as far as you know, how long it's going to take, right? So you actually have a perfectly healthy body. You have to wait to the end of the world for that. That, says Augustine, is perfectly in keeping with materiality. It's perfectly in keeping with the nature of your body. Your body is a temporal thing. Your soul is not qua soul temporal. Therefore, it's perfectly appropriate that the salvation of your body takes time, whereas the salvation of your soul doesn't. That's the way he looks at it. Okay. Now that your question raises, could be answered beyond the way you're asking it. I think you could say that, which is again would be another course. Yeah. I think you could make a very good case if you just trace sociologically the history of human. You use the word idea. I don't think there are any ideas in the gospel. Okay. However, the impact on human ideas of the event of the incarnation, I think is measurable. Right. If you consider the fact that we actually take as a given, not necessarily fulfilled, by the way, the equality of women, the equality of all men, and so forth. Don't try that on a Roman. Don't try that on a Greek. Don't try it on maybe half of the world today, even, right? So the impact of what is, if not explicit, implicit in belief in Christ, I think is very real historically. Yeah. And we're living it out in some sense, which in turn would be related to my notion of the thinking now occurring as this third stage, for want of a better term, in the fourfold on page 1 of the first handout.
So my question, the reason I use the word idea is that it sounds like an idea. So maybe this is simply a historical question, but I think it's more than that. I'm listening to Jesus and I'm being told I'm a sinner and I have a chance so do I know that before I hear that I'm a sinner?
Perhaps not.
Okay.
Perhaps not.
That's really one of the questions, because otherwise it sounds like
no. I think that's part of the news. Part of the news is part of the problem here. there are all kinds of stumbling blocks on the way to the altar, you see. And the scandal here is that you stink.
Yeah.
Okay, and you need a bath.
Got it.
Do you see?
Yeah.
Now, speaking of baths and stinking and dirty feet at the Last Supper, right? If you read that text carefully, when Peter objects to, oh Lord, no, you can't. I should wash you. You should. No, he says, if I don't wash your feet, you have no share with me. You have no part with me. There's a distinction in the Greek, which I can't reproduce here off the top of my head, but it's a distinction between being clean and needing in other words, it's needing to take a bath and needing to have your feet washed. The apostles are clean. They don't need a bath because they have believed. You say, but that doesn't mean because, this will help us, right? Just because you're clean doesn't mean your feet aren't dirty if you just came out off the street. You may have taken a bath to come here, right? But if you were walking around in Palestine in bare feet or in sandals, even though you took a bath when you left the house, your feet would be dirty and we would have to wash them. You see, and if I were a good host, I wouldn't do it. I'd have my servant do it. You see. So that shows you right there, very concretely, it's not an either or. It's not you're so clean you don't need a bath, a washing of some sort from time to time. You see? Okay.
Could I
yes.
ask a question
Sure.
to finish something off? So my question has to do with, in order to prepare following death for the resurrection of the body, therefore a Christian burial buries the body. It doesn't cremate. Is that correct?
It's not anymore.
Okay, this is what Jesus would call a man-made regulation, right? It is the traditional. It was the traditional teaching of the church that cremation was, I don't know, prohibited or whatever it was, right? Yeah, it was forbidden or something like that, whatever they called it. But in the contemporary world, they relaxed that because cremation was understood previously to signify disbelief in the resurrection of the body. But now, for very practical reasons, cremation is made okay, especially since it doesn't seem to carry in our world any such necessary implication. I think for the very simple reason that we're no longer living in Christendom. You see, in Christendom, there would be a kind of cultural agreement that would say to burn my body is a way of my saying I don't expect to be resurrected.
Well, in some sense, it implies that the belief in the resurrection of the body actually no longer exists.
It could. In the past, it could have meant that. Some people could have thought that and had themselves cremated to make a point, and that was forbidden. What I'm saying is, we live in a certainly in the West, in a very highly secularized world, in which that framework doesn't exist any longer, and there are many practical reasons why it might be expedient to cremate the body without it being a way of saying I don't believe in the resurrection.
Yes.
Because the resurrection is not affected by that, right? God doesn't. He's not put off by cremation.
2 seconds. When I was a child, the cardinal in Chicago had his arm.
No, you told me that. You told me that story.
And
yeah.
it was very carefully sent
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. But that's all. Yeah,
So
the wholeness of the body, to put the body. But again, we're talking about a kind of symbolic gestures. I don't think they go to the nub of the matter.
The implied question is, what is the nature of the body, and what is the nature of matter,
and of resurrection.
Correct.
Therefore, of resurrection.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
And relationship, of course, to the Eucharist.
Right. Okay. And
there's
we're going to touch on those questions. Inevitably, we have to do that. But if we went off on some attempt to give a definitive thinking now occurring answer of the body, we'd have a lot of trouble getting back to the text. We still haven't got to it. So I'll do my best to cover both bases as we go along, but I can't claim to be able to do the thinking now occurring perfectly in this context. Or how shall I put it, in a thoroughgoing way. Okay, I did want to quickly go back to Mark, and it's a theme that comes up over and over again in today's gospel, but I want to show it to you in Mark, first of all. 3:31 and following. Let's see if I can find that myself. That should be on...
Read 3:31. What is that?
Mark 3.
Yeah, the true
verse
kinsman
31.
on page 1664 of the text. 1664. And about 2/3 of the way down. Now his mother and his brothers arrived. Are you with it?
Yeah.
And standing outside sent in a message asking for him. A crowd was sitting round him at the same time. The message which passed to him, "Look, your mother and brothers and sisters are outside asking for you." He replied, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking at those sitting in a circle round him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Anyone who does the will of God, that person is my brother and sister and mother." Now, as I say, if you read today's assignment, you'll see that that theme is reiterated several times in the Gospel of Matthew. And the most extreme and vivid example is that when Jesus says that he hasn't come to bring peace, but he's come to bring a sword. Now, this sword is obviously not a physical sword, right? Not a literal sword in that sense. But I want to connect it here. It's the sword that severs the natural relations that exist among human beings. Now I'm going to do a little thinking now occurring. Once you sever the natural relations, as when I say sever them, as decisive for yourself, go back to your original question, Baltrout. In other words, when it comes to my salvation, when it comes to my spiritual, mental, and physical health, you say, I cannot have that. Jesus says, "Follow me," and the guy says, "I will, but I have to bury my father first." Okay, I can't have that relationship which is critical to my salvation, and at the same time have a relationship, the natural relationships that I have and ties. I want to say now, in my own language, the connections that I normally or naturally have, in such a way that they get in the way or interfere or take priority, in the case of burying my father, take priority over my relationship to the incarnate Word. Right? So I'm saying the sword here is the severing of all of those natural connections. And then I was thinking, well, that's nice, because if you sever all of the natural connections, and you don't expect to wind up in a grandson this time. You don't expect to wind up in the solipsism of modern self-consciousness. In other words, a multiplication of individuals, you see, who have no tie to one another ontologically. Right? So that, for example, when Altizer speaks of the death of God, he understands that in his earlier work very nicely. I quote it at great extent in Foundation. He has, I think it's in Total Presence probably, which would be the place to find it, I would expect, in principle, given the title of the book. Altizer speaks of absolute solitude. And in that absolute solitude, all distance, all interior distance between, I'm quoting him now, self and self is gone. All right? So we have a kind of indistinction of self in an absolute solitude. Okay? So if I were to try and read the thinking back, now occurring back into modernity, when I talk of absolute particularity, absolute specification, you see, we would be talking about absolute selfhood. In other words, not an infinite multiplicity of absolutely unique persons, you see, but a multiplication of selves who are all the same. Do you see? Ultimately, which sameness becomes clear, which absolute solitude, absolute selfhood becomes clear when God dies. Do you see? When we're reduced, when every other, I mean, God is traditionally, I mean, Bart would understand this, right? God is the other. The death of God means the end of the other. It's the end of otherness. If there's anything more antithetical to the thinking now occurring, there couldn't be anything more so than the death of God theology, as strange as that might seem, given the fact that we both agree that there's a certain something going on, right? But the understanding of what that something going on is, it would appear at least diametrically opposed, those two understandings. Okay, now what got me off on that? Was it? Oh, severing.
sword of Christ.
So then I thought, so if the sword that Christ is severs the connections, the natural connections, and we're not going to conclude from that. Now, by the way, we didn't conclude from that right away. It took 1,500 years before we started to conclude from that. You see, that salvation was a matter of individual selves being saved in an individual one-on-one relationship with God without any real knowledge or sense of the body as absolute witness, is what I'm trying to bring out both in the text and the thinking now occurring.
Is that the Reformation?
Yeah. Okay. We have the beginning with Luther of that subjectivity. We also have it in science with Descartes, you see. That subjectivity which eventuates in the death of God, all right? If we're going to avoid that, so to speak, and yet stick to the notion that the incarnation means the severing of natural connections, then we're going to have a new understanding, to go back to Alan's question, a new understanding of nature, a new understanding of the body, do you see? A new understanding of how the relational character of nature is to be understood if it's not to be understood in terms of connections. Okay? And then I thought, I do have in Beyond Sovereignty, I have the expression, which I don't elaborate on, but I found myself putting it out on the page because I was playing with the notion, which is very controversial in our world, of natural law. Natural law at one time was a given. In our contemporary world, certainly in the 20th and 21st centuries now, the question of whether it is a natural law is highly problematic, and if there were one, it would be politically incorrect. Do you say? Okay, so I say there that the natural law in the context of the thinking now occurring is not going to get caught up in that political debate. You see, it's really a political debate. I mean political now in a broad sense of the word. I don't mean in a narrow sense. I mean political in the same sense that self-consciousness is inherently political. It has to do with the polis. It has to do with a inside-outside, defensive, implicitly or explicitly warlike consciousness, you see. So what I'm getting at is the phrase I came up with in Beyond Sovereignty, I came up with it spontaneously, that the natural law in the thinking now occurring is to create nature. Do you see? So in that sense, the fundamental notion that there's no pre-givenness of nature, you see, there's no... The world does not pre-exist our doing it. All right. Let me stop there. But to come back to the level at which the text is operating, the other thing is not only that Jesus, as Matthew will say, is a sword to break these natural connections as what's the word I'm looking for? As decisive. You see, you still have your mother. Right? I mean, his mother's still outside, by the way, when he says, "Who's my mother?" I mean, in some literal sense, she's outside, right? But they don't count. Those natural relationships don't cut it, or he cuts it, right? At that point. But the other thing here in this place, and also heavily emphasized by Matthew, which I really want to drive home, which I think I don't have to do it, you should get it if you're reading the text carefully, is that what salvation is. You see, well, salvation, if I look at it the way I took your question and the way I answered it, salvation is being made whole, in every sense of the word, top to bottom, inside and out, thoroughly, ontologically freed from all of the negatives of sin. But if I take it actively, what does it mean to be saved? It means to do the will of God, as the text says here, or the will of the Father, as he more frequently says, you see. And what I want to emphasize there is the doing, do you see? So that what does it mean to believe here? It means to be open, but to be open, not like the zero and the unum and the one. That zero, we can talk about it without referencing the others for a moment, you see. But we understand in the logic that you can't really have that openness that isn't with discretion and with doing the right thing, right? So in other words, there's no genuine openness in the thinking now occurring unless it, as it were, eventuates. That's not a bad term. I would say it absolutely eventuates in doing the right thing in and through having the patience to see what's new. Okay, all right.
So one question about the sword. In Jewish custom or Jewish law at the time, was there something specific that Jesus was speaking to in bringing the sword to cut those natural connections? Was there a way that Jewish culture understood itself to have a salvific relationship to God because of its relationship to family? Or
yes, I think so. I mean, in other words,
Honor your father and mother.
yeah, honor your father and mother, but more generally, the people, in other words,
right.
the Jewish people Israel was a chosen people. Okay, and so this is where we have this. See, one thing I like about Jesus, just man to man, he's not an either or guy. Okay, so he's on the right track. I'm speaking just humanly now. Okay, it's not either the Jews or the Gentiles. It's first to the Jew. I come first to the Jews, but I have a flock, but I have another flock, right? And ultimately, they're going to be one flock, right? So it's the Jews and the Gentiles ultimately are the recipients of this message. First the Jews, then the Gentiles, and then ultimately the unification is ultimately envisioned, all right? So in that sense, it does cut into the Jewish notion of their. I have to be very careful here because nothing is simple. In Judaism, there are several strains, not the least important of which is the prophetic strain. So the prophets, people like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos, all those guys, right? Zechariah, etc. In the prophetic tradition in Judaism, there is an anticipation of the universalizing of the God of the Jews, right? He is understood to be the king of the universe, and there is a sense of the implicit, if not explicit, sense of mission to the whole world, even in Old Testament Judaism. So Jesus doesn't come out of nowhere, you see? So go back to the fulfillment idea. He is the fulfillment of the expectations of the Old Testament, but insofar as he is that person through whom the mankind as a whole gains its salvation, not just the Jewish Messiah, not just the Savior for the Jews, right? And insofar, see, this thing is so complicated. Insofar as he is the Savior of the Jews, he's not what they were looking for. When I say they now, you have to be very careful here, right? It goes back to your question about the term Jews in John's Gospel. They're all Jews. So when I say they, I'm talking about the bulk of the people, the mass of the people rejected Jesus. They did so not personally, they didn't take a vote, but they did so through their representatives, the priests and the scribes and so forth. The establishment rejected him, right? But individual Jews, the disciples of Jesus and their disciples, they did accept him, you see. But what I was going to say was that nevertheless, no matter even the disciples were at a loss initially as Jews, you see, because they were expecting their Messiah was going to be somebody who saved the people, which they understood in what we could call a very worldly way. You see, they expected a king to come and liberate them from the oppression that they suffered at the hands of, in this case, the Romans, but earlier the Egyptians and so forth and so on. You see what I'm saying? So the very kind of Messiah, whatever the kingdom means here, whatever. See, I would not use the term sovereignty as the notes sometimes do. Right? Whatever the kingdom of God here is, it's a kingdom. Also, I'll say beyond the world. Right? It's not a kingdom that's so beyond the world that it's not going to change the world. It's not going to have any measurable effect on the world. It is. Do you see? But it's not going to have the expected. It's not going to be a kingdom in the expected sense of the word. Were you going to follow up?
I come back to the question of salvation. I think it's in John where he says salvation comes from the Jews.
Yes, that's right.
Which is following the law through and through. I mean, it comes.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, salvation comes from the Jews in this. Well, I think you have to take it very concretely. He's talking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan, right? I think that's where he says that.
Yeah.
When he says salvation comes from the Jews, this is in the same context in which he's saying, in effect, and you're looking at it. Salvation comes from the Jews. God intervened in the world, chose the Jewish people, promised them a Messiah. Yes, the law is there, but there's an expected Messiah. Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises made to his bride by God in the Old Testament. He promised her, Israel, you see, salvation. Jesus fulfills that promise to the Jews. Right? Now, it's not just the Jews. Human beings in general, the Jews in particular, are not automatons. So I can offer you my love, Waltraud, but you can turn me down. You're free to do that. You see? Okay. So when God saves humanity, he doesn't force that salvation upon them, you see? And therefore the Jews in particular, now this is an important issue for Paul, as we'll see again in Romans, because Paul is a Jew in spades. Paul is as Jewish as you can get. Okay, he was a persecutor of the Christians. He was a Pharisee. He was learned in the law, and so forth and so on. Right. So it's very painful to Paul personally, humanly speaking, the notion that Jesus was rejected by the Jews. Now you understand we can use that term. We've defined it, I think, carefully. He's rejected by the Jews, meaning the whole, the people as a whole, even though there's a remnant, you see, and this is a very Old Testament idea, right? If you read the Old Testament, you find out the Jews, I told you the Jews are giving God grounds for divorce over and over and over and over again, but he never does divorce them, you see? Okay. One of the things that saves the Jews of the Old Testament from being totally unredeemable is that in every really bad moment, there's a remnant, a certain portion of the Jews who remain faithful to God, even when most people are not. So in that sense, there's nothing new going on in the New Testament. From a strictly Jewish point of view, the fact that there were only a few Jews, relatively speaking, who latched on to this Messiah is old hat. Okay? It's always only been a few of the Jews, a few of the chosen people who actually remain faithful to God in previous context. So I'm not sure. Okay. Okay.
just two quick things. When you say, I mean, the kingdom is not just beyond the world, but beyond, and therefore can affect the world. It's not causal.
Well, I would say not only can, but does.
Yeah, but it's not a causal.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's not, and I alluded to that, and you can find a footnote to that effect in 3.3 of Beyond Sovereignty,
okay,
where I distinguish the
yeah. And
the relationship of the Creator and the world, and it would apply to the incarnation. It's not causal relationship. It's not cause and effect, but it is effect.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question, quick. You said having the patience to see what's new.
Well, that's part of the index that's the definition of discretion. Go ahead.
Okay.
That's where, in that box on the index of discretion, that's second dimension in which I put in the theological virtue of hope.
Remember, I'm not the one who's taking this course. That course.
Okay.
I got it. Yeah.
In 2D,
Yeah.
Hope,
I got it.
discretion.
I got it.
The analogy in Plato, it's the military class. In other words, it's courage.
Yeah.
Courage would be the moral equivalent of the theological virtue of hope.
Yeah.
So it's hanging in there,
Yeah.
you see. But it's hanging in there in this case, not simply in the Platonic sense as the spirit. That has to be.
Yeah.
I can't help it. It's just too complicated. Spirit in the Platonic context does not mean
Yeah.
anything that it means in the Bible. It means the thumos.
Spirit
it means
fed.
the spirit, as we would say, he's a spirited person. Achilles was a man of spirit. You see, a passion, not particularly a man of intellect. You see, okay. So in that sense, patience,
Yeah.
the endurance, and so on. Okay. Okay. Let's. Boy, I'll tell you.
No more questions.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. I just want to sort through here because I want to get to Matthew. I just want to see if there's anything else I should. Well, maybe in Mark we can take a look at chapter 9, 33 and following. There are several passages beginning there that relate to children. The first of which should be 9:33 to 37. Yeah, right. Under the title in our text, this is on page 1673, Who is the Greatest? They came to Capernaum, and when he got into the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? They said nothing, because on the road they had been arguing which of them was the greatest. Speaking of children, they act like children too, see. So he sat, maybe that's why they passed muster after all, despite all their shortcomings. So he sat down, called the 12 to him, and said, if anyone wants to be first, he must make himself last of all and servant of all. Again, you have the washing of the feet as a kind of concrete example of that. He then took a little child whom he set among them and embraced, and he said to them, anyone who welcomes a little child such as this in my name welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. And then again, on 10:33-36, which should be, on page 1674, Jesus and the children, about 40% down. People were bringing little children to him for him to touch them. The disciples scolded them, but when Jesus saw this, he was indignant, and said to them, let the little children come to me, do not stop them, for it is such, I'm leaving out the two because it's not in the Greek, for it is such as these that the kingdom of God that is, I'm not reading it as it is on the page. You got that word, anytime you see the word belongs, get a red marker and just cross it out. It's not in the original. There's no belonging here, okay? And in fact, it's even better than that in Greek, right? Because it is such as these little children, what they're translating as belong is the genitive in Greek, which has a lot, genitive is subtle case in Greek. It can mean a lot. It can mean possession. It can mean belonging. But it has a lot of other meanings, not the least of which is that of which something is composed. We have it in English. If I say, this here is a basket of flowers, meaning this basket is composed of flowers. This is a basket that contains, see that? Terrible. That is populated by flowers. Right? Okay. So the kingdom that he's talking about, it's not something that belongs to children, number one. It's something composed of children such as these, right? To be more explicit, so you don't take it like Nicodemus would take it, right? Oh, we're lost because the only people who are going to get into the kingdom are all these little kids running around at the Alexander Robinson School. Anyone who does not welcome the kingdom of God like a little child, all right, will never enter it, all right? So, again, it's really another version, now that I mentioned Nicodemus spontaneously, it's another version of the notion of being born beyond, or being beyond birth, right? Being a child, again, would be, in this context, you see, being a child beyond childhood, to say. Okay. So what does it mean to be a child? Well, I mean, we have a notion of what it means to be a child. I think, at least I have a notion, depending on your background, you might have a different one, but I think the essence of a child, what's likable about a child is the spontaneity, the unpredictability. People say children are innocent, they're not. But they are spontaneous. They are unpremeditated, generally speaking, you see, and they only learn to be premeditated by having to interact with all these corrupt adults, okay? So it's something of that openness, that readiness of the child, the trusting. The child will trust, you see, unless it's been conditioned by its parents not to trust strangers, the child would naturally trust, you see? So the trustfulness, the openness, the readiness, again, that's what I think what we're talking about here is the essence of faith. Now, one other very important, we did the fig tree, we jumped to that last time out of sequence, but again in Mark 12:18, something worth noting here, if I can find 12:18 on page 1677, the resurrection of the dead. Then some Sadducees. Now, the Sadducees you probably know from reading the footnotes. The Pharisees are the strict adherents to the law. Okay, since no one can actually fulfill the law, Jesus takes the liberty of calling them hypocrites. Okay, but nevertheless, that was their position. They understood themselves to be righteous because they understood themselves to be obeying the law. The Sadducees were the free thinkers, the non-believers, the secularists, as it were, right? And among the things they didn't believe in, therefore, would be the resurrection of the dead. That's the context. Came to him, and they put this question to him, Master. So this is a trick question. In other words, this is not somebody looking to be enlightened, right? This is a trap. And also a kind of put down, right? Because this idea of the resurrection is ridiculous for the following reason. Moses prescribed for us that if a man's brother dies leaving a wife but no child, the man must marry the widow to raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. Okay, so it's carrying the argument ad absurdum, I think we would call it, right? And they died, leaving no children. The second married the widow, and he too died, and the third, and none of the 7 left any children. So, of course, the woman had to marry all 7 in this hypothetical. Last of all, the woman herself died. Now, at the resurrection, when they rise again, whose wife will she be, since she had been married to all 7? All right. Now, there are 2 aspects of the answer. The first one, which is of substance, in the next paragraph, surely the reason why you are wrong is that you understand neither the Scriptures nor the power of God, right? For when they rise from the dead, men and women do not marry. No, they are like the angels in heaven. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? In other words, the resurrected body, we could read into the text a little bit here without doing any violence to it, is not going to, it's going to be your body, to say, but it's not going to be of a marrying kind, right? In other words, the purpose of marriage will have been fulfilled, so it raises questions about the nature of a glorified or resurrected body, you see, and how can it be your body and yet you're not going to have any married life and so forth and so on. Those are all interesting questions, but they're all kind of special questions. The essence of it is you're going to have a body, but you're not going to have a body that for which the marriage would have any meaning.
You can't have sex.
Presumably, since you're not supposed to have sex out of marriage, right? But it's not that you can't, you see. I mean, presumably you need to have sex, right? Sex is the best we do toward unity in this life, you see. But if we're one flesh in a resurrected body, then the need for this relatively imperfect union is obviated. All right, so logically it makes sense. But the more important, I wouldn't say more important, but equally important thing I want to get to here, he says, now about the dead rising again, how God spoke to him and said, I am the God of Abraham, spoke to Moses, that is, right? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is God, not of the dead, but of the living, says Jesus. You are very much mistaken. Now, what's really important to try and get a hold of here is we're not dealing in this text with any Platonic or even philosophical, you see, conceptions of God, which I could put more positively by saying that the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Jews, the God who is the King of the universe, the God who created the world ex nihilo, that God, a definition of, there are several definitions of God, is I am who am, right? That's one. God names himself, I am who am, right? But that God is from the get-go, in this context, according to Jesus, he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? If God is the source and the essence and embodiment of life, and he is the God of these 3, then they're not dead. Do you see? In other words, right? I almost want to say, I think I could say this. I may have to refine the use of the term, but more or less, in one way or another, they are embodied in God. you see, in one way or another. If not in the complete and perfect sense that they are understood to be so after the resurrection, right? In some, this raises all kinds of interesting technical questions, all right, about the afterlife. You say, you haven't asked this, Voltri, but one day you're going to ask it, right? What happens? What are you doing after you die, between now and the resurrection? Okay? All right. For these kinds of questions and answers, I refer you to Ratzinger's Eschatology and Death. It's one of his best books, by my standards. It's a really he shows he's actually thinking in this book. It's amazing. I mean, he's good. He's a theologian, but here he's really doing some serious thinking, short of the thinking now occurring. Right? He still makes reference to self here and there, which is very, very, very annoying, right? But one of the things that Ratzinger points out historically in Eschatology and Death is that the early church understanding of where the deceased believers are after they die and before the resurrection is rooted not in any Platonic or philosophical notions of an afterlife, but in a Hebraic, Jewish understanding, which surfaces. Did we get to the story of Lazarus and in the bosom of Abraham, or we didn't come up with that yet? I don't think we haven't gotten there. All right. Well, you'll see that in pre-Christian Judaism, late Jewish, sometimes scripture and sometimes what they call deuterocanonical books. In other words, wisdom writings, Jewish writings that not all of which are in the canon. There is the notion that there is a world after this in which the good and the bad are existing, and Christianity, out of its Jewish roots, takes over that. So when Christ is understood to be crucified, died, and descends into hell, into the underworld, you see, he's descending into a Jewish underworld in which Abraham and Jacob and Isaac are hanging around, waiting, you see, to be saved, completely saved, you see, by the incarnate Word. Right? It's roughly that. So anyway, the point I want to make here is that this God, as Jesus makes clear, is the God of the living. This God does not exist apart from his. So if I want to generalize it just so you get the full notion, he's the God of the universe. That is to say, he is the creator of the universe. In other words, he doesn't exist. It's not Aristotle's unmoved mover. It's not a God who, in any sense of the word, exists apart from a universe or apart from an involvement in the creation, even if that involvement were reduced to the moment of creation. Do you see what I'm saying? But it's much more than that. The moment of creation is followed by the revelation to Moses on Mount Sinai, and then it's followed ultimately in this text by the incarnation of the Word. Yeah.
So is that what's meant by the living God? That phrase.
Yes. Yeah. The living God and the God of the living.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Dave?
Yes, Sarah.
Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question related to this. And I was curious, in the transfiguration scene, when Moses and Isaiah show up.
Elijah.
Sorry.
That's all right.
And the disciples were not afraid at that point. They even offered to pitch a tent for them.
Peter did, yes.
And I was curious why they weren't afraid then in seeing the resurrection of Moses. What would be the thinking there? But then, of course, they were afraid when the voice of God appeared. And it seems related to this right here, where you're talking about the prophets living, it being embodied in, they aren't dead.
Well, yeah. Now, the why they might not have been afraid initially in the scene of the Transfiguration, I think they were just probably dumbstruck. They were probably overawed, I would imagine. Right? They didn't. Almost, you could say, they didn't have time to be afraid, I suppose. I think the more substantive, so I mean that's a psychological analysis, I don't know what it's worth. The more substantive part of your question, I think, is yes, Elijah and Moses could appear together with Jesus in the Transfiguration because they have been alive all along, right? So that the fact that they appear doesn't involve, for example, it doesn't involve a resurrection per se. They're just able to be there by the power of God. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. There's something I wanted to say about that, but
Is the resurrection a unique event that only happened with Christ?
Okay. Up until now, yes. In other words, the only person who has been resurrected is Christ.
What about the biblical figures?
They have not yet been resurrected. No.
Thank you.
All other human beings other than Christ will be resurrected at the end of the world.
But what is it that's resurrected?
The body. The body, because yes, this is where you get into. These are perfectly valid. Again, I'm not
you to go into the answer now.
Yeah, no. The basic answer is that the body is going to be resurrected, meaning that at the end of the world, let's say you die before the end of the world, and you, at the end of the world, your body will be reconstituted, for want of a better term, resurrected from the dead, call it what you want, and you will be united with, or your body will be united, you will be whole again. That's the real point. In other words, the resurrection of the dead means you will be restored to your full humanity, which involves body, soul, spirit, however you want to parse it, depending on your metaphysics, okay? But you understand the New Testament is not doing this metaphysics, right? But you'll be the whole person that you are now. And so the short way of putting that is we speak of the resurrection of the... Sometimes one of the creeds says the resurrection of the dead, and another creed says the resurrection of the body. I think the Apostles' Creed speaks of the resurrection of the body. I think the Nicene Creed speaks of the resurrection of the dead. I should know. I just printed it out.
On the other hand, you are whole. You just said salvation means that you're whole.
Yes.
In body. So what does the resurrection add to what?
It adds what's... Okay. The question is right on, and it adds what is... Now I'm going to use this in my technical thinking now occurring sense. It adds what is lacking to you when you die.
And
earlier than the resurrection. Mm-hmm. Lacking not as a deficiency, but just as a different state, as it were, for want of a better term. I don't like the word state, it's too static. A different way of being than the way of being that you have before the resurrection, but after your natural death. So it's a different state of being. That state will be the ultimate, for want of a better term, the ultimate fulfillment. So you could say, going off your question, there are this fulfillment and this fulfillment.
So it completes salvation?
Yeah, this is perfect. All right, let me. This question that you're raising is related to something I was mulling over in my mind the last couple of days. I don't know what triggered it. I was listening to some guy talking about the significance of the temple. You know, the temple is destroyed in 70 AD, but the Jews had a temple, but there were temples all over the world, right? The Romans had lots of temples. Okay, so what is a temple? You know, a temple comes from the Latin templum. And what a temple is in the ancient world is I guess we would call it mathematically, it's a projection, except instead of projecting out and above, it's a projection down. In other words, the temple is a projection of the whole world, of the universe, of the cosmos, as the Greeks would say. Right? So the notion of the temple is that it is the universe, I want to say writ small. And it's associated with the gods, you see, or God, as the case might be, because even the Jews, even the New Testament speaks of God in the heavens or in heaven, you see. So the God is above, God comes down to earth, so to speak, in the form of the temple. Right? So it embodies the divine reality of the universe in some way or another, without splitting hairs about the different theologies. Okay. Now, what's interesting, and I hate to jump all the way to the end at the beginning, right? But the Apocalypse is where we're going to wind up, which is a book that you think you got questions now. You're going to have a few questions then. But the punchline in the Apocalypse is the New Jerusalem, which comes down from heaven. And I allude to this passage in a couple places, probably in Beyond Sovereignty and elsewhere. What's really interesting, I was thinking about this the other day after somebody somebody was talking about the temple and said what I just said to you, which I knew that, so that was not the point for me. The point was, I was thinking that the famous passage in the Apocalypse is that when the New Jerusalem, the new city, comes down, right, that would be a symbol, if you want, of the new world, the new heaven and new earth, right, visualized or imaged as a new Jerusalem. John, the author of the book of Revelation, says that in that New Jerusalem there will be no temple. Mm-hmm. That the Lord and the Lamb, God and the Lamb, will be the temple. You see? Now I'm thinking about, I had never quite thought of it this way. Now this is maybe too subtle. I mean, I don't think it's too subtle, but I'm just apologizing in case it is. That's really what the thinking now occurring, it envisions. You see? In other words, the elimination of the temple, or as it were, you see, the language is an impediment. As it were, there's no need for a temple because not only is God and the Lamb the temple, so you don't have a temple in which to house them, or in which, right, or in which to, as it were, figuratively embody them. It's not only that, but if there's no temple in the city, then what that really says, this is the point that struck me, is that the city itself is the temple. That's the notion that the ultimate fulfillment is what I'm calling the thinking now occurring, now beginning. I'm only saying beginning. I'm not saying we're there yet. Altogether, okay, is the embodiment of the creation in omnipotence. That's what I'm referring to. You see, so this beginning of the resurrection is the beginning of that complete elimination of these, I guess, representational notions of the relationship between the creator and the creation. It's something like that, which somehow or other I feel is somehow or other relevant to the question you asked, if not immediately so.
I'm satisfied, but I also wanted to say that therefore all dualistic notions are eliminated.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, okay. Okay, let's go over to, I think we can do this. Let's see. Where is Matthew here? This must be Matthew. I didn't write it. Okay, so let's go to Matthew. Let's go backwards, actually. Yeah, now there's a lot of stuff in Matthew. Matthew's kind of chock full kind of gospel. First thing to note, I think it's probably noted in your, he speaks of the kingdom of heaven as opposed to the kingdom of God, which indicates his being highly sensitive as a Jew to the Jewish practice of going out of your way to avoid using the term God, right? So heaven is just his substitute; it's just a euphemism for God. He means the identical thing. And then we have the genealogy, which I'm not particularly interested in for our purposes, but I do call your attention to, and probably the footnotes do, is you're going to find another genealogy when we get to Luke. It's going to be similar in looks, but when you look at it carefully, this genealogy begins with Abraham. All right, so you could say this is very much the genealogy of faith. Right, Abraham is understood to be the father of faith. All right, so we have humanity up until Abraham. With Abraham, we have a promise made to Abraham that because of his faith, which, by the way, is unconditional, Abraham's faith was tested by his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac, right? Which sacrifice was really loaded, okay? Because not only it was his son, which would be tough no matter what, but it was his only son, which makes it tougher, which he had in old age by a miracle, so it wasn't something he was going to be able to easily replace. And even worse than that, you want to talk about really stacking the deck, this was the son whom he had already been promised would be the one through whom he would have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky or the sands of the beach. I can't remember which one it was, but that's the idea. You got it? Okay. So this sacrifice was, you couldn't have weighted what was asked of him any heavier than that, and yet, much to Kant's chagrin, okay. We know the story. Kant says either Abraham misheard God right, or it wasn't God; it was the devil pretending to be God. In any event, it's immoral to. You see? Okay. Well, all right. Acknowledging Kant's objection in the biblical context, that moral objection doesn't even surface, I don't think, except implicitly. Kierkegaard does a good job of this in Fear and Trembling, I think it is, right? Yeah. Where he kind of analyzes. Again, you have to keep in mind, in a modern self-conscious context, a believing but self-conscious context, he analyzes what was going on there, as it were, psychologically in Abraham's mind, if one can imagine it. But setting all of that aside, it's the test of faith. So, faith begins then in the faith that ultimately leads to the revelation to Moses and then to the incarnation. Somehow or other begins with Abraham and his descendants. Okay, I don't want to get off on that, but when we get to Luke, we'll see that we begin with Adam. That's right. All right. So that issue of the Jews and the Gentiles, which is running through all the Gospels, okay, first the Jews, then the Gentiles, the emphasis in Luke is going to finally be on the Gentiles, okay? But I just call that to your attention. All right, John the Baptist on page 1612, and the antipathy between them and Jesus. I think the first substantive thing we should look at is the testing in the desert. Jesus, Jesus is baptized by John there at the bottom of page 1612, and a voice from heaven came at the very last line, "This is my son, the beloved, my favor rests on him." I think it was probably in John that the Spirit rested on him, all right? Pretty much comes to the same thing. Then after the baptism, the first thing that happens is the testing in the desert. Jesus goes out for 40 days fasting in the desert, and he is tempted by the devil over on page 1614. The first temptation, "If you are Son of God, tell these stones to turn into loaves." But he replied, "Scripture says human beings live not on bread alone," which is something you've heard a lot about in the last 2,000 years, often quoted, "but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." You know what I thought? This was just a bizarre thought I had. Human beings are fed by stuff coming out of the mouth of God. And you know what? The image the first time it ever dawned on me, it's like the mother bird feeding the little birds out of their mouths. It's really interesting. And if you read the Old Testament, there are a lot of, even though this is a very patriarchal group, the motherliness, the compassion that the God of the Old Testament has for his people, the reason he doesn't divorce them is they get to his womb in some sense. So he has the kind of compassion that is stereotypically associated with the female, right? So I'm thinking it's an interesting question, because otherwise, I mean, you can take it literally, it makes sense literally, but I think the image is probably worth something, yeah.
Those birds that have that gland that feed, it's both male and female.
Oh, well, there you go.
Take turns.
Oh, well, that fits in with my my short commentary on Genesis. Make him Adam, mankind, understand, in our image. Let's make them male and female. That's interesting. Yeah. All right. So if God in some sense is both, then the separation that we associate with sexual activity is prescinded in effect when you come face to face with him. All right. But what I wanted to do with this, as you won't be surprised, is I want to relate it again to the index of simplicity. The first temptation and his response has to do with readiness, dependence, receptivity. He depends on God alone. You see, he switches the metaphor from the literal bread, but in other words, it's I'm eating, I'm going to be nourished by, God's going to take care of that, right, with his word and my obedience to him. That's the way I'm reading that. The devil then took him to the holy city and set him on the parapet of the temple. If you are a son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for Scripture says, he has given his angels orders about you, and they will carry you in their arms in case you trip over a stone. And Jesus replies, do not put the Lord your God to the test. In the Greek, it's ekpyrosis, and the root there, well, first of all, it's an ek. Anytime I see an ek, my ears go up. A beyond notion, you see. But the pyra there is the notion of proof, test. That's where the test comes in the English translation, right? And if you think of the second moment of the ethic of simplicity, the unum moment is the moment of discretion, the moment of seeing what's different, right? If I put it in Aristotelian terms, I don't do that on that page, but if I did it in Aristotelian terms, I would see the essence in the moment of discretion, you see. I would see what's different here, what is the essence of this situation, you see what I'm saying? And the essence is, in Aristotelian terms, that without which you can have no proof, right? So what I'm saying is that, now I'll go back to the pedestrian terms in which the devil is tempting him. You jump off the top of the temple, hey, you're going to force God to show himself. He's going to rescue you. You see what I'm saying? You're going to see him acting there if you really believe in him, right? And he's rejecting him on that level. And then the third, next, taking him to a very high mountain, the devil showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, I will give you all these if you fall at my feet and do me homage. Then Jesus replied, away with you, Satan, for Scripture says, the Lord your God is the one to whom you must do homage. Him alone you must serve. If I put it simply, worship, right? In other words, the devil is asking to be worshipped. Jesus' response, quoting Scripture again, you should worship only God. And that's the unbold one moment. That's the doing the right thing. What, again, I want to emphasize, because it's going to come up again and again in this gospel, is the ultimate zero unum one, that unity, all right, that movement, if you want to call it that, for want of a better term, that sequence, that relationship, ends in doing, all right? And what is that's what the answer here is. What should I do? I should worship God. What is the real doing? It's the doing of the will of God. Acting, you see what I'm getting at? Acting. So doing the will of God is worship. And he says in today's gospel, he finally got around to saying, not everyone who says to me, Kyrie, as we say in Brooklyn, Lord, Lord. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, right? But he who does the will of my Father, all right? So if you didn't get it, you know, what is faith, what is salvation, and so forth, practically speaking, and that's a loaded term, it's kind of a pun. Practically speaking, it's acting. And to act properly is to do the will of God. Or in the thinking now occurring, after 2,000 years, we can fill that out and say, to create the world. That's effectively the will of God in the lacking relationship between created omnipotence and omnipotence. All right. Liturgy, by the way, interesting in the Greek, is light urgia. The light means public. Can be translated public. I don't like that, but its root is the people. It's right. It's laos in Greek is the term for the people. The root of liturgy is ergos. Well, it's orgos, but it's ergon, work. Right. So we'll see I've already have it in my answer in the third appendix to Beyond Sovereignty, where I'm answering a question about evil, and I reference there. In fact, on the last page, or at least the last page of the first handout is excerpted from that appendix, where I point out in that appendix, I think in one of the footnotes, that blasphemy literally means workless words. You see? Words that do not create, that do not work. All right. So when I look at the liturgy, I think of it as a kind of, I think of ritual. What has it got to do with? You see what I'm saying? But in the context, liturgy is the work, right? It is the creation of the world. You know what I'm saying? So that the liturgy of the Mass, you see, is the work. I want to say I don't know if there's a Greek word like this, but it would be something like anargon, right? It's the above work, it's the beyond work that is creating the world, which is saving the world in some sense, is the notion, you see. So when I think of liturgy as some sort of a play acting, I'm not getting the understanding of liturgy as, how can I put it, as liturgy understands itself, you see. But it's liturgy. It's liturgia. It's the work done by the people, for the people, and what's the one? Of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what liturgy is. It's the creative work that's done there. All right. So when he says, so the devil has got. See, the devil is a smart guy. Okay. He knows exactly how to. He knows where the weak spots are, and it should remind you of the parable of the sower too. You see the three different fates of the edge of the road, the shallow soil, and the thorn overgrown. All right. Then he calls the disciples as usual. He just says, "Follow me," and they do. Again, preparedness, readiness, openness. Then I think the next thing we need to do is the Sermon on the Mount, which again is, I give you the handout just as a frame of reference. You'll see on the handout, which is from Beyond Sovereignty, that I have lined up the. And I found out, by the way, that John Chrysostom, which is who is a saint, a Greek father, early father of the church, 4th century. He also thought there were 9 beatitudes. So it's not just there's some precedent for it. If I had to defend it, what I'm getting at is that these beatitudes are part and parcel of my logical historical background to the Ennealogue of the ethic of the new morality. Yeah.
Just a quick question. So, in faith as sort of complete openness, when the disciples fail to understand,
but not just not. Yeah. Well, all right. Finish your question. I don't want to interrupt.
The failure to understand,
right,
or to see, or to hear,
right,
is a failure of openness.
Well, in the sense that, yes, okay.
So they come when he calls, so that's faith and
that's
completely
right.
Open. But then he goes after them for failing to see.
It's a version of, I think, Waltraud's question about where I'm saying there's fulfillment and there's fulfillment,
yep.
Right? So yes, they have the openness, the receptivity, if you want,
but they haven't
you see, Christianity is not. It's all about the real world, and in the real world, most of us are pretty stupid. We're slow. We are slow, more or less. Some are quicker than others, and we notice the difference sometimes. See? Okay, all right. So these are real people who are as open as they can be, and apparently enough so. And it's going to take time and some assistance, as we'll see, and we'll see it in spades in the Acts of the Apostles, but it's foretold in the Gospels from the Spirit. So it's going to take some more help right, from the Spirit to increase. I think that's the best word to use here. All right, there's a fulfillment, but fulfillment is not static, and therefore fulfillment does not preclude increasing fulfillment. I'm tempted to say this, as it were, a threshold that they cross, that others don't cross, of openness, but there's more to be done. There's more work to be done.
So I guess my question is really the connection between that the failure to see or hear is a failure of openness.
Well, everything depends on the context. It's not a failure. It's not such a failure. All right, this is cute, but I'll do it anyway. It's like having dirty feet. They took a bath. They don't need a bath. They're clean. They're open in that fundamental sense, but there are impurities. They're in their openness. There's incompleteness in the fulfillment. And by the way, it's not just the apostles in the text, but what I'm saying, the thinking now occurring, is that we're only at the beginning of the resurrection in the final sense of the word, and to get to this beginning has taken 2,000 years. See? So, if you can't, but you see, and I think the only way you can deal with that logically is to understand the logic of the thinking now occurring. In other words, that in the now, whether you're talking about the now when he was explaining things to them they didn't get for the umpteenth time, they didn't get it, right? And he tells them again and again and again, right? And then maybe they'll get it, but then when they finally get it, they get it after Pentecost with another shot of spiritual input there, booster shot. But then mankind is more and more clarifying the implications of this incarnation, and we have 2,000 years of clarification, not all of which is unproblematic by any means.
Yeah, I think
it's something
I see
like that.
Something here, which is
the important thing being, the real importance of this is not to say, see, otherwise what we're dealing with would be magic. We're not really dealing with magic. We're dealing with the transformation of the real world.
Yeah.
And the real world is, at least even in the thinking now occurring, is temporal. It ain't spatial, but it is temporal. Yeah. And therefore, whatever the difficulty of conceptualizing it may be for any given individual, it's understanding that there is a now in which the prophets work, which is not a prediction now, so much as a recognition within this now that what is here and now fulfilled, if I'm Isaiah, you see, is not an alternative to an increased fulfillment, an increase in that fulfillment. You see? And if I say, relatively speaking, that the incarnation is the fulfillment of the law, Jesus says that himself, you see, it's the fulfillment of the law, but it's not the end of the world. I don't know how else to put it, but that's as simple as you can put it.
But so when Jesus...
But there will be an end of the world. That's another whole issue.
Right.
Okay.
When Jesus criticizes them for not having faith, it's not because they're rejecting something. It's because it just hasn't...
It's too much for them.
Fully, yes.
Does feel like
That's really my question.
They don't. Yeah, I think that's it. That they don't have... Yeah, because...
they're not like the ones who
No.
don't have faith.
No. He wouldn't bother explaining it to them if they were in that camp.
Yeah.
He has no truck. He doesn't have much patience with what he calls the hypocrites, people who are of bad will. See, the disciples they don't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Alan?
I was wondering if your question relates to the classic analogy of the horse and rider, where God is the rider and you're the horse. In terms of the development of faith, the development of openness, so the rider says, "We're going to jump over this chasm," and you, the horse, go, "Forget it. We can't. We'll be killed." And God, the rider, says, "If you go down, I go down. So we're going to do it." And so you do it, and then the rider says, "We're going to run straight up that mountain." "No, I can't run straight up." "No, you will, and you have to, and you learn, and eventually there's just perfect, quote unquote, perfect communication." Is that similar to your?
I just was trying to connect failure to see with openness, and I think
but it's not just failure to see. I think
Exactly.
Alan's example reminds me of something else that's probably in today's reading, where Peter wants to walk on the water, and interesting enough, apparently he does for a couple of steps, and it doesn't say he looks down, but he must look down, right? And of course he starts to sink, right? And Jesus says to him, "Why did you doubt?" Right? So again, you see, is he unbelieving? No, but is his belief perfect? Right? In fact, I think that's one of the guys who asked him to cure his daughter or his cousin or something like that. I think that's in the gospel, one of the gospels, where the centurion or somebody, whoever it is, says he believes and asks to be helped in his belief. Am I misremembering that? I think anyway. That's certainly part of the tradition. Right? So you can believe, but that does not make your belief perfect. All right. Okay. And then we have the passage on that same page, 16:16. Do not imagine that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. And by the way, this brings us right back to your original question. I have come not to abolish, but to complete them, to fulfill them. Plerosai.
Pleroma.
Yeah, pleroma, it would be the English noun. In truth, I tell you, till heaven and earth disappear, not one dot, not one little stroke is to disappear from the law until all its purpose is achieved. All right, and then...
what is the law?
Okay. I think it's fair to say that the law that Jesus has in mind would be the commandments, the so-called Ten Commandments. He's asked about the law in one of these Gospels where he gives the answer, the two great commandments: love God, the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, all your soul, I think, or spirit. And the second, he gives a second, and the second is like to it: love your neighbor as yourself. Those two formulations of Jesus are understood to summarize, for openers, the Ten Commandments. Because if you take the first three commandments, they would pertain to how you're supposed to deal with God: the Sabbath, God's name, etc. And from the fourth commandment on, father and mother through stealing and stuff like that, those are your relationships with your neighbor. So the love of God and the love of neighbor would be the simplest way to say what the law is all about. To say, in the thinking now occurring, I want to specify that out to say the love of the Creator and the love of the creation, and then you can fill in the blanks as to what creation involves. And it involves people, things, truth, bodies, etc. See? But I think that's what the law is. Now, it gets a little complicated in the Jewish context because these Pharisees and scribes who are going around, they understand by the law not only these commandments, either the two great commandments or the 10 specified commandments, but they understand also the other aspects of Jewish law, which Jesus more or less dismisses as man-made laws, but would be understood in the context as corollaries, working out of the basic law. You see, in other words, if the basic commandment is to keep holy the Sabbath, all right, well, then somebody has to say, well, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean I can ride my motorcycle on the Sabbath, or I can't? You see? So those kinds of laws about the Sabbath, don't pick corn on the Sabbath, which is an issue in one of the Gospels, all of those specific, it's like the church, the so-called Roman Catholic Church, I think the last reference, right? The church makes specific laws, the only justification for which, you see, like the Jewish laws concerning the Sabbath, are to define concretely what it means to keep the Sabbath, let's say. Do you see what I mean? So, I think that's my answer to your question. but of those two, of the ritualistic law, so to speak, the law of sacrifice and the law of the detailed laws concerning the Sabbath, etc., and so on, I think Jesus could only have that in mind here if we take all of that in the context of the spirit of the law. In other words, all the prohibition about cooking on the Sabbath, working on the Sabbath, what he's saying, okay, I don't have any particular problem with that. You need to understand, however, that what that's all about, I fulfill that. I set aside my whole being for the Lord. You see? You set aside one day out of every 7, to say, for God. But the fulfillment of the law is not to be restricted to those compartmentalized things. I think that's what it means. But it's not just that. It's that the new standard is higher than the old. So, for example, in verse 21, it was said to our ancestors, "You shall not kill, and if anyone does kill, he must answer for it before the court. But I say this to you, anyone who is angry with a brother will answer for it before the court. Anyone who calls a brother fool will answer for it before the Sanhedrin, and anyone who calls him traitor will answer for it in hellfire. So then, if you are bringing your offering to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar, go and be reconciled with your brother first, and then come back and present your offering." So that is the higher standard. In other words, if I go all through my whole life and don't kill anybody, physically, literally kill anybody, in Jesus' reckoning, I probably cannot claim to have fulfilled the 5th commandment, I think it is in most calculations, you see, because I surely have been angry at a few people from time to time, you see. And why is that? What is the perfect meaning of "thou shalt not kill"? The perfect meaning of that is that thou shalt love thy neighbor. That's what the perfect meaning. Love your neighbor. And in fact, he goes so far, I think we've already come across this, of loving your enemies, in case you had any doubt about it. Not just your neighbor, but your neighbor in the most comprehensive sense, including the neighbor next door who really is out to get you, to ruin your life, to make your life miserable. Do you see? So there's in that sense. So another sense of fulfillment is that if I could convince myself before Jesus came along that not just lusting after women, but not actually doing anything was okay. I was a righteous person. If I could convince myself of that, I'm disabused of that notion near. So I'm thinking another meaning. See, I mean, there's too much to this. A lot of richness to it. Another significance of the term fulfillment here is almost the law is fulfilled here. Forget aside whether you fulfill it in the other sense or not. The law is fulfilled in Jesus' mouth when he articulates that the requirements of the law are for a form of perfection. That there's no, do you see what I'm saying? So in that sense, the law is fulfilled. So if you could think for 1,700 years or whatever, you see. Well, no, 1,500 years before the birth of Christ, Moses. So from 1,500 BC till then, you could think that if I just didn't do certain things specified by the law, I was a righteous person. No, because that was not understanding that not only that the perfect person in the perfect humanity is fulfilling the law in that sense, but also that shows you that the requirement of the law, properly understood, is perfection, not just not doing egregious acts. You see? Okay. Likewise, adultery, we touched on that last time, and I anticipated what he says over on page 1617 in the end of the second paragraph, or the first one beginning on that, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And somewhere, it isn't here. Now, where is it? In this same gospel. It must be, it's later on, this issue comes up. Now, let's see. There should be a reference here to it. 19:9, that must be where it is. So if we just keep our finger there and turn over to 19:9.
We go go back to this adulterous thing?
We're going to go. Well, we're not going off the topic.
Okay, great.
I'm saying the issue comes up again.
Yeah.
In 19:9 on page 1640, and he says there, which I think we've heard in before, in the middle of the second paragraph in chapter 19, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and becomes attached to his wife, and the two become one flesh. They are no longer two, therefore, but one flesh. So then, what God has united, human beings must not divide. They said to him, why then did Moses command a writ of dismissal? And he says, it was because you were so hard-hearted. Now, we've heard that before elsewhere. It must have been in Mark. And then he gives the same... Oh, and then he says, and then I say this to you, anyone who divorces his wife, I am not speaking of an illicit marriage. And the footnote says that the best reading of that is... illicit is another word for illegal. In other words, you're not allowed to marry your first cousin. Right? I mean, it's more comprehensive than the Jewish law, but that's the principle. So in other words, if you had a legitimate marriage, there's no divorce, is what he's saying. Now, here's what I want to get to. All right, speaking of the disciples, okay, they're not too swift, but I think they're very swift here. They say to him, if that is how things are if that's how it is between husband and wife, it is advisable not to marry. Now, the first reading of that, you say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, if I'm going to get married and there's no out, and not only that, there's no out if I want out, but if this son of a bitch throws me out, I'm stuck. I can't get married again. I mean, so I would be very slow to enter into that kind of right? That's the way it reads, doesn't it? You see? If that's the situation with marriage, it's better not to marry. I mean, right? Okay. Now watch what he says. It is not everyone who can accept what I have said, but only those to whom it is granted. There are eunuchs born so from their mother's womb. There are eunuchs made so by human agency. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves so for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. I want to give credit to the apostles here. I want to say there's not they when they say that then it's better not to marry, meaning, well, I'm not going to put my foot in that trap, right? Jesus doesn't interpret it that way. He doesn't say to them, oh, how dumb can you get? I told you, you still don't get it? He doesn't give them one of those answers, which he's perfectly capable of. We see that, see? He sees that they see something here. What they see here is that if you require a woman who is the innocent party, who is divorced by her husband, and Leahy says could be as young as 22, actually she could be as young as 17 or 16. If you prohibit her from getting married for the rest of her life because her husband divorces her through, let's assume, for no fault of her own, the disciples draw the right conclusion, not the pedestrian one that we all draw immediately. Oh, well then it must be better not to be married. Because if it wasn't better, how could you see what I'm saying? In other words, if this woman could be required to remain the rest of her, let's say her whole natural adult life unmarried, then that has to be good. It's not a punishment. She didn't do anything. Do you see what I'm saying? And yet he picks up on that. You're right. It is better not to be married. But we don't require that of everybody. See? So if you're up to that, that's the ideal. If the question is, should I marry? That's the answer. It's better not to marry. But it's not required.
The footnote is nice.
What is
Christ invites to perpetual continence.
Yeah, right.
Total consecration.
Yeah. And of course you can see from the history, speaking of the effect that it had, the history of Christianity in particular, not exclusively, but okay. All right. The rich young man, similar problem.
Do we go back?
Huh?
Do we go back or do we?
Oh yeah, let's go back. We should go back. Where were we? Did I answer the question you were about to raise, Nancy? On
Yeah, I just didn't want to go over it so fast because
Okay.
it was sounding pretty.
it is.
Where,
It is.
Where is it now?
Well, we're back in
Lost it.
5:4, I think,
Page 16,
and following.
Oh, five.
5-4. Oh yes, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, But the whole thing here is a demand for, if you want to, in the best sense of the word, it's a loaded term in English. It's a demand for perfection. It's a demand for completeness. It's a demand for holding back nothing. You see, in the language of the thinking now occurring, it's a requirement to have no self-reference. You see? And of course, one of the problems with marriage is that the phone keeps ringing, okay? Or she keeps making appointments for me. We got to go to dinner. So marriage comes with a lot of pleasant encumbrances, but nevertheless a lot of distractions, which don't come when you're not married. Okay.
Here's I see what my question is, that it has to do with the word adulterous, so it's as if Jesus is, that's the way it was understood, so he's saying, you don't have to do this to somebody.
Oh, right. Back to that question.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In other words, it's a matter of if you want desiring to do it or intending to do it, right?
You don't have to do what to them.
You don't have to commit adultery in order to be
so bad as to make somebody an adulteress.
Yeah.
Were there adulterers in those days?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Little
How do you know?
pathetic feminist voice here.
Okay. No.
Detail, right? Where there are adulterers also.
Yeah, I think they might have gotten away with it more frequently.
Yeah.
Right. That wouldn't be surprising.
And get stoned.
Yeah, right. Although somebody was stoned in Iran the other day for adultery, a guy.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, on page 17 in verse 43, you have heard how it was said, you will love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say this to you, or I kind of referenced this accidentally, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven, for he causes his sun to rise on the bad as well as the good, and sends down rain to fall on the upright and the wicked alike. For if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Do not even the tax collectors do as much? And if you save your greetings for your brothers, are you doing anything exceptional? Do not even the Gentiles do as much? You must therefore set no bound. This is the translator. I think it's right in substance. You must therefore set no bounds to your love, just as your heavenly Father sets none to his. The Greek is teleos, perfection. Complete, right? But complete love, I think it's fair to say, has no limits, right? And it doesn't even distinguish, therefore, any more than the Father distinguishes good and evil in sending, what does he send? Rain, all right? Rain in this case. So if you look at the index of simplicity, you'll see that omnipotence is P, not Q. It's non-discriminating, box 4D, non-discriminating and doing. So omnipotence is pure doing. It doesn't discriminate, do you say? And even you could apply that to the Father box, which is box 3, which is memory in Augustinian terms. That if I reconcile it more closely with what Jesus says, since he specifies the Father. The Father, in doing the right thing, you could say he, after the discretion box, he discretes good and evil, but he reigns on both of them. You see, in other words, he doesn't do it out of ignorance, right? But he knowingly, and that's much more in keeping with the notion of loving your enemies. God loves his enemies. Okay. And you should do likewise. The big message here, which I guess it must, I don't know where it's going to come up. I haven't seen it yet, I don't think, is that you are to be perfect like your heavenly Father is perfect. Maybe he already said that. Yeah.
But if you say that God loves his enemies, but Christ clearly makes a clear distinction between, there are many situations that are described in Matthew in which he does terrible things to people.
Like, for example?
Oh, he doesn't. He talks about it. He doesn't do it, but he talks as if. We'll probably get to it, or I should.
Yeah, you'll go to hell if you don't. So where's the love in that?
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. There seemed to be a contradiction in what you were saying.
Yes. What's
Well,
your-
seems is the right word.
yes.
I don't think he uses it's not a term that would come up in the New Testament, I don't believe, per se. Although it might come up indirectly in certain contexts. What we're talking about here is freedom. It goes back to the notion of freedom. All right? So if you go to hell, he's already told us, I don't judge. So I mean, if you think of the judge going to hell, let's say an analogy, going to hell is going to jail. It's life imprisonment or something like that. I don't know what it is. Okay? What Jesus is saying is that I'm not sending you to jail. You're sending yourself to jail. I've told you what's required, and you are free to tell me you're free to tell me to go to hell. But if you tell me to go to hell, you're going to hell. Right? In other words, God is not. It's very tough after Calvin. Poor Calvin. See, Calvin tells us that God was sovereign, and he created from all eternity the good guys and the bad guys as such. He predestined. This is Altizer loves this. This is Altizer, isn't it? Altizer is in love with evil. Okay, there's no question about it. Calvin and Altizer, in this sense, is deeply Calvinistic. Okay. He's a radical Protestant in every sense of the word, maybe more radical than Calvin could have been even, that God creates and predestines from all eternity certain creatures to suffer eternally. Well, all right, and at which point Thomas Jefferson said he should have been locked up, put in a straitjacket. I mean, that's what Jefferson literally said. Not in public, in his correspondence. Okay. However, I always have to come to the defense of these guys, right? Calvin's no slouch. He's no idiot. Why is Calvin taking this absolutely extreme position? What is he trying to do? He's trying to emphasize what I'm trying to emphasize in the gospel, namely that perfection, right? In other words, it's the perfection, divine perfection, and divine whatever, creation in the self-conscious mind of modernity, beginning with Calvin and Luther, especially in the case of Calvin, turns into the notion of sovereignty. Do you see? And so it's the absolute freedom of God in creating translates into the absolute sovereignty of God in creation, and therefore, from Calvin's perspective, you can't be free. It can't be up to you whether you go to heaven or to hell. It has to be up to God, because in Calvin's mind it would detract, it would take something away from God if you were free to, as it were, choose your own eternal destiny. Do you see? And what's the basic fallacy there? The basic ontological, logical fallacy, which is not peculiar to Calvin, it's the notion that God is something to be compared to his creatures. You see what I'm saying? When Jesus says you want to know the Father, you look at me. You see me, you see the Father. But there's no one behind him. You know what I'm saying? In other words, he's not a mask of the Father. Right? So then the Father, in that sense, not having assumed humanity, go back to my appendix 2 now, Beyond Sovereignty, the various kinds of persons, even though you can't absolutely dissociate the Spirit and the Father from humanity, because they are one with the Word, who has assumed humanity. Nevertheless, qua Father, qua Spirit, no humanity, personally. Do you see? So they remain, as it were, perfectly invisible, just perfectly invisible. I don't know how else to put it, right? And therefore, what I'm getting at is that there's nothing there. I'm trying to speak I'm trying to use a visual analogy negatively. There's nothing to compare the world to. There's nothing there to compare it. It's not a nothing. There's no comparison, is the point. And I mentioned this in Thomas Aquinas. Thomas deals with this issue in his own way, right? That the way he puts it, it's kind of ironic. He makes a proportion. the point of which is that there's no proportion between the creature and the creator. Right? Remember that? Thomas says the distance between the lowest creature and the highest creature, that distance between the bottom and the top of creation, is as nothing, quasi nihil. I quote it on my website, and I guess I quote it in the second appendix, as it turns out, to Beyond Sovereignty. Quasi nihil is as nothing compared to the distance, this is Thomas, between the creator and the creation. You see? Which is his comparative way of saying there's no comparison. It's kind of right? So we want to get beyond having to make that kind of proportionality, but I'm just showing you the history of it. And that kind of distinction, that lingering understanding that, right? And the other way in which this comes out very powerfully in Thomas, although everybody passes over it because it's a nightmare, is that Thomas says clearly, explicitly, in the Summa contra Gentiles, which is his intellectual conversation with Gentiles in the medieval context would mean non-believers. In other words, probably principally Muslims and perhaps Jews. He makes it very clear that no one, right? Now, he would have to accept the incarnate word here, but he means there's no human knowledge of God qua essence. It's impossible, right? So, which is another way of saying it's a total blank, as it were. Were it not for the incarnate word, I would have, right? If I'm going to have any knowledge of God as God, qua God, I'm going to have it only through the incarnation. So Revelation. Now Barth runs with this. You see that? If you got that last thought, Barth says, "Yeah, that's it." There's absolute, because he absolutizes the notion. There's not only no knowledge of God, except in the incarnate, as revealed in Christ, but there's no knowledge, right? Because everything is assimilated by Barth to God, right? So there's a kind of negative comparison between God and the world. So everything is wrong, everything is untrue outside of revelation. Everything. So Barth is very clear on this. It's not only that I have no knowledge of God apart from the incarnation, the revelation here, but, says Barth, I have no knowledge of man. Do you see? Whereas Thomas would say, wait a minute, you're going too fast. I have some knowledge of man. It may be imperfect, but I have some knowledge. I have some natural knowledge. My natural reason, to go back to an earlier question that you raised, does count for something, according to Thomas. For Luther and for Barth, who is really not in the Lutheran tradition, but in the Reformed or Calvinistic tradition, but so Luther and Calvin, you see, are more or less on the same wavelength, even though they have different specific theologies. What was I going to say? For Barth, natural theology is of the devil. And in that sense, he actually says in one of his texts, speaking man to man, that Thomas is the Antichrist. Aquinas is the Antichrist. Because he takes seriously a natural revelation of God as opposed to this revelation with a capital R. Right? That God is revealed in the natural world, in his creation, you see, is what Thomas says. Barth is saying we have no knowledge through anything natural, including reason. So Luther, Calvin, Barth, they're on the same wavelength. Paul, we'll see, has no problem. In fact, he asserts that the Greeks, meaning the non-Jews, he means the Gentiles, non-Jews, have a knowledge of God through the creation. And if they say they don't, then they have closed their eyes. They have refused to acknowledge what is plain as day, says Paul, even if you didn't have the law, even if there were no revelation. Okay. Lilies, the lilies of the field, the birds of the air. I don't. Well, that would be 624. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's the passage in which he says, "Take no thought for tomorrow," and I expand on that notion of the thinking now occurring and say that not only are we to take no thought for tomorrow, have no future in that sense, but if that's the case, then why should we not understand finally that omnipotence takes no thought for tomorrow? Okay. But in the context of the text,
page 16.
Did you find the page?
625.
6:24 to 34 is the chapter and verse. Trust in Providence is the title on page.
16.
Yeah, Sarah?
What page are you on?
16:19. Trust in Providence. Trust in Providence, 16:19.
Okay.
So in other words, don't worry. Be not anxious is the idea, right? Basically, God has it in hand, right? Is the basic idea. But it's, again, that's part of what we mean here by faith, trust, you see, openness, receptivity. The lilies of the field and the birds of the air are analogous. They have an analogous relationship to God as little children do. You see, they're just not thinking ahead. They're living now. Okay? And you see, here's the thing. Oh, I love Ratzinger. I'm almost starting to like him. He has this terrible reputation, you know.
Oh, he
has
sure
a
does.
very bad image. But when you read this Eschatology and Death, which I did recently in this context, it's really persuasive that he's a really serious thinker. Again, not doing the thinking now occurring. I don't want to oversell this. But he makes the interesting observation, which is perfectly compatible with something I said about the thinking now occurring earlier, when he is talking about the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He says that, Ratzinger says that what we need to understand is that we live in the memory of God. Okay? And memory is the Augustinian notion I put in the Father box, 3D. All right. So in other words, the reason I'm thinking to bring that up in this context, I mentioned the birds again in the air and so on, and I said they're all living in the now. So yeah, I didn't say that, but that's what I meant. But that now isn't going anywhere. Do you see what I mean? In other words, that now, the divine memory now, not in the sense of remembering yesterday, but in that ontological sense, which I discussed it earlier on in one of our courses, where memory is the giving form, the form taken by being. You see, the memory close to the notion of this, and the cardinal's dead arm is a member of this body. This body is a membering. It's the instance of members. It's nothing but members. It's all members, right? Relating one to another. All right. Well, the divine memory, therefore, is that, as it were, that body in which all of these discrete nows, only one of which I ever find myself in, is part and parcel of that memory, which is not extended in space, for which the question of containing or not containing is just not an issue. You see? So the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they are, as it were, nows in that divine memory. And in that sense, they're immortal. And in that sense, they don't perish, you see. That's the idea. All right, so there's a lot more to this being childlike that might meet the eye at first glance. Okay. 7:7, which is a nice passage about asking and searching. Effective prayer on the top of page 1620. Ask and it will be given to you. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. Now, by now you should be ahead of me. Ask is 0. Ask. Want to be discreeting? You want to get to the unum stage? You've asked. Search. Find out what's new here. What's different. Look for what you're looking for. See? And then knock. Now I'm doing something. See? Well, of course, if you're doing all those, like the 3 seeds that fall on the variously receptive ground, then you produce a harvest. Then you get the result, right? But you have to do those 3 things, so to speak, and you have to do that with the whole, if you want, of your being. Everyone who asks receives. Everyone who searches finds. Everyone who knocks will have the door opened. No one would give his son a stone if he was hungry. If you then, evil as you are, know how to give your children what is good, how much more will your Father in heaven get good things to those who ask him? Right? Now, of course, obviously it's loaded, because the asking here has to be perfect. You see what I mean? If you had faith, you could say to that mountain, get up and move. But of course you don't. Or, yes, you do, but you don't have, you have little. He always says this to them, doesn't he? You of little faith. I think when Peter goes down through the waves, I think he says, in effect, if you had, I don't know if you had faith, if you have little faith. Okay. So there are, as it were, degrees of openness, degrees of receptivity. Oh, here's the passage which I referenced earlier, but it can't be overemphasized. It is not anyone who says, same page, True Disciple, True Disciple, page 1620, middle of the page. It is not anyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, who will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the person who does the will of my Father in heaven. When the day comes, meaning the end of the world, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, work many miracles in your name, teach courses on the New Testament in your name, and so on, you see? Then I shall tell them to their faces. Now I alluded to this indeliberately on my part, I think in our first class. I will tell them to their faces, I have never known you. You see, I don't know you. I go back to that Greek. You said the Greek is gignosko, but the Semitic meaning of knowing in this context is to have experience of. I have no experience of you, and that's it. You see, it's not just I don't recognize. I can't. It's too dark out there. I can't see your name tag. That's not it. I don't know who you are. I don't know you. You have anybody say Sometimes somebody will say to me, not too many people, fortunately for them. You know me, right? That kind of thing, right? Right? Okay. I have never known you. Away from me, all evildoers. All right. Therefore, everyone who listens to these words of mine and acts on them, and I want to do the same 1, 2, 3. Listen is the ask part. The searching, the discreting part, the definition part, the essence part is the words of mine. So I'm listening, and what I'm hearing are the words of the incarnate word. And then step 3, I've gone 0 unum, I go 1, I do them, I act on them. All right? Such a person will be like a sensible man who built his house on rock. Okay? And the rain came, and of course it survived. But whoever listens to these words, now, see, this is a version of the parable of the sower again, you see? Who listens to these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a stupid man who built his house on sand. And it fell, and what a fall it had. All right. Let's see. Okay, 12. Yeah, we have to do the disciples here, the 12. These Waltraud's word for it, improving my jerks, was dummies. Okay, so they have enough faith to pass the test here on 10:1, the beginning of chapter 10, which is going to be on page 1624. He summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits and power to drive them out and to cure all kinds of disease and all kinds of illness. Then we get the names of the 12 disciples, including Judas. Okay. So that's interesting. We talk about the freedom to refuse the grace of God, or whatever you want to call it. Judas, at this stage of the game, apparently, is still on the inside. He's getting this power. He doesn't betray Jesus until the last minute, so to speak, right? So you can go quite a ways down. This is also a very Catholic understanding, but it's obviously scripturally based, as opposed to a lot of Protestant, not all Protestant understanding, because there's so many Protestant denominations, it's hard to make a generalized statement here. But often in Protestantism, you get the notion that once saved, always saved. Right? Whereas it's clear from Judas would be the example par excellence, that he's on a par with all the other disciples right up to now, getting these special powers, so to speak, given to him by the Lord, and he still has the opportunity of turning his back on it at the last minute. So he's receiving, he must be in some sense open to it, but eventually he's going to close down. So in other words, I think in my language, I don't think it's the language of the text so much, but the implication is always this ultimate freedom of the individual and the ultimate, to use a favorite word of Zarina's, the ultimate responsibility that I have if I go to hell. Right? I'm going to go to hell on my own hook. I don't know whether it's Dante who says, I think it's Dante in the Divine Comedy, who is otherwise, by the way, you have to be careful, Dante, he's a heretic. But he looks very pious because he's got all this stuff about heaven and purgatory and so on. But on this point, he would be right. If I'm right, that it's Dante who emphasizes that hell is a function of divine love. To say, in other words, if God is going to give me perfect freedom, he and ultimately I have to run the risk, if I'm going to be really free, of screwing it up. I mean, really screwing it up. Otherwise, it's just a joke. You see what I'm saying? I mean, really booting it once and for all, or how free was I to do what? Okay.
Can you say in 25 words or less why Dante is a heretic?
25 words or less.
Yeah.
There are probably numerous reasons. One, the intellectual, his thesis on the in the De Monarchia, which is Latin for concerning the monarchy, which is often translated in today's context, his treatise on world government alleges an equality of the spiritual and natural orders. In other words, he puts the king and the pope on a par, and there's something wrong with that. I mean, theologically. Okay. Now, where did I want to get to? Oh, so all right. So now he gives them this. Then he says in the third paragraph in chapter 10, do not make your way to Gentile territory. Do not enter any Samaritan town. So this is the priority of the Jews now, right? The 12 disciples are to first go to the Jews in their mission. Go instead to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and as you go, proclaim that the kingdom of heaven is close at hand. Then he tells them, to make no provisions, take no gold, and so on and so on. Interesting enough, on 1625, at the end of that paragraph, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves, so be cunning as snakes. So don't be stupid, but don't be bad. Cunning as snakes and innocent as doves. All right, and when you are handed over, and he there, as he says elsewhere, I guess in John, the servant is no greater than his master, right? So if they have persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. And along those lines, he says in verse 19 on page 1625, when you are handed over, do not worry about how to speak or what to say. What you are to say will be given to you when the time comes, because it is not you who will be speaking, the Spirit of your Father will be speaking in you. So at that point, the Spirit will be, in the language of the first handout, page 1, the Spirit will be embodied in them because they will be embodied in him, and he will have gone back to his Father and will have sent the Spirit, and so forth and so on. You can parse that all out at your leisure. And then he says, what I've already anticipated, the disciple is not superior to the teacher. I just want to make a general comment based on my handout. Oh, yeah, today's handout where which I alluded to by accident last time, but it struck me. That's what I think I said at the beginning of the class. If I didn't get it out, I meant to say it. That's one of the things I love about this class, not just this class in particular, but our classes, that I learn a lot. Okay, so it never occurred to me until I came upon it by accident last time. When I don't know even how the question came up, I just came out with it for some other context. These 4 marks of the church, 1 holy, Catholic, and apostolic. And it had never dawned on me, all right, I got 4, that's clear. So as soon as I see 4, I say, well, I got to put them in my boxes, right? But what goes where? And my instinctive answer was the apostolic nature of the church goes in box 4. And then you would say, because I don't think I explained it at the time, if I got that far in class, I don't remember, why would it go in box 4? But if you look at box 4, which is back on handout 1. I reproduced it because I put them in. Yeah, it's on handout 3. On today's handout, page 3, box 4 is the omnipotence box. It's the box of the ethical disposition of gratitude and so forth. But if you look down at the exegetic analog right above ecclesiastical mark, which is the new line. The exegetic analog is the literal historical. All right. In other words, if you take those 4 marks of the church, one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, and if you just think about it a minute, one, holy, and Catholic are kind of general terms. I hate to use the word, but you understand what I'm saying. They're not immediately specific terms. They're not immediately concrete. But if you say that the church is not only one, holy and apostolic, well, that's all well and good, you see, but it's grounded in, as creation is grounded in omnipotence, it's grounded in the apostolic, and these 12 dummies. Well, this must be from God.
This
Must be from God, you see, because these guys are not quite capable of pulling off what they pulled off. Do you see what I'm saying? But the real, that's not the point I'm starting out to make. The point I want to make is that literal historical omnipotence is the box of creation. It's the box in which the lacking of the creation takes place, in which the lacked creation is the really real world, and the really real world ain't ideal. It's made up of really real people, all of whom are more or less stupid, you see, and more or less sinners. Do you see what I'm saying? And yet that's the root. Do you see? It's what I'm almost saying that you could say, as it were, okay, as it were. If in the thinking now occurring you needed to engage in this kind of proofing in a kind of Aristotelian, Cartesian way of proving things, you could almost say that the church is rooted in the apostles, in these real, concrete, individual human beings, is the proof of omnipotence. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So I won't say any more about it. We can think about it.
Considering the imperfect nature?
Yeah, the imperfect nature, yes, but in the sense in which I was distinguishing imperfect from sinful, in considering the creatureliness of the real createdness and limited or naturalness of those apostles, is the groundwork of the work of salvation, which by implication, you see, by inference, which inference is drawn out without boundary in the thinking now occurring, means that so are we. Do you see? Right? We're no more or less real than they are, and some of us are stupider and some of us are a little swifter. But the real point is that the salvation of the world now in the thinking now occurring turns into the creation of the world. Do you see? The making whole of the world is the work of real persons, which real persons have not only minds and spirits, but have bodies, and are in that sense locatable, placeable, are in place, one in an infinite number of places in the thinking now occurring. Okay, what else did I want to say about these guys? I already did the sword thing. 42, let's see. What did I say? 10, 1 to 42. So 10, 40. Oh, the cause of the dissension, I already touched on that, the sword, on page 1626. The renouncing self to follow Christ. Oh, and then he repeats this again because he did the same thing with the kids before. You remember the children? He says in the conclusion of the instruction on page 1626, anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. And so I have here I got an X, and then I got my stick figure with the feet going to a parenthesis, and inside my parenthesis I've got Jesus with the feet next to him and the head of the stick figure next to the Father, all of which is my shorthand and my margin for what's on the way I've laid it out on page 1 of the first handout. And if anyone in the bottom of that paragraph gives so much as a cup of cold water to one of these little ones because he is a disciple, then in truth I tell you, he will most certainly not go without his reward, which you have to understand would be the reward of a disciple, because if you give somebody something because he's a prophet, you get the prophet's reward. If you give someone something because he is a disciple of Jesus, then you get the reward of a disciple of Jesus. So when you give to the other person, you see, who is embodied in Jesus in the language of Leahy, you see, then in that act of giving, you're sharing with that person. You can't share, you can't have that person embodied in you without your being embodied in them. So the real concreteness of this notion of non-connected type relations, you see. In fact, I almost want to say that it's better than being connected. I think being embodied in you, Todd, is much more intimate than being just connected to you. Like if you were my cousin, it would be one thing. But if I'm embodied in you and I can't be embodied in you unless you're embodied in me, I think that's the most intimate connection, and yet there's no lack of freedom in that relationship. In other words, it's part and parcel of the free relationship of persons. I already thought, because somebody mentioned circle, I mentioned it and you repeated it. I haven't done it yet, but I threatened to do it. I always did from the get-go that circle of unconnected dots, and I looked at my little figure for embodiment, and at that head, if I fill it in and make it black, then I can make a circle of little embodiment figures, right? The head is each of those dots, and you see what I'm saying? And yet there's that discontinuity between each of those bodies, and yet they form a circle of embodiment, a relationship. Okay, and that goes back to the question that Alan raised, which is an echo of a question that you raised, I think, on day one about what is a body. Well, a body is a relationship, for want of a better term, a mutual relationship of sharing in the being of one another, which sharing in the being of one another on the part of the parts is part and parcel of the body, which is the body of Christ. Which in turn, of course, is in a way which transcends our ordinary notion of physicality, physical bodies. Okay? So Paul's language for the resurrected body is going to call it soma pneumatikon. I have it on it's on Foundation, the title page. It's not translated. It's code. It's 82944 times 10 to the 40th. But in English, it's to translate spiritual body, by which he doesn't mean, because we're doing beyond now, he doesn't mean spiritual as opposed to material. You see, he means transformed matter, the body of the new heaven and the new earth. What were you going to say?
I just want to ask something about the word connection.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, I thought you said something about the notion of self involving connection.
Self-embodying connection.
Involving connection.
Yeah, I don't know whether I did. I just don't remember saying that, but it could easily.
Like self-consciousness.
Yeah.
I was thinking that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it would be true, but I don't remember the context. I just want to hit one more note in the last few minutes we have here, and that's 16:13, chapter 16, verse 13 and following, which is the famous and controversial Peter and the rock upon which the church is to be founded. He asks who people say I am there on the bottom half of page 1636. And Peter says in the fourth line, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, Simon, son of Jonah, you are a blessed man, because it was no human agency that revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. So now I say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my community. Before I say anything about that, it struck me when I read this for this class that that's the same rock that the smart guy builds his house on earlier in the thing, okay? So now I say, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my community, and the gates of the underworld can never overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. All right. What I wanted to say about that, I think that was 724. I'm not sure what was the. I just want to remember what the.
Where the
whoever listens to these words of mine and acts on them. That was the one. it's like a man who builds his house on a rock. So Jesus is building his house on the rock that Peter is there's so many things, qua acknowledger of Jesus' true identity. Sorry. Insofar as Jesus has the gift from, not from flesh, but from the Father, right, from heaven, from the Father, to be able to say, to acknowledge, to discern, I don't like that word, to discrete, that you are, however you put it, the Son of the living God, right? You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It's liturgy is public work. It's the work of the people. So this is not a personal attribute of Peter's, right? Insofar as you are articulating my identity, then you are the rock of the church. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, you, insofar as in a special way, right, of all these guys standing around, you're the one who spoke up and gave the right answer. So your place is that specifically different. That's part of this, what specifically differentiates you from the other guys who also have a place at the table here and whom I've just recently given all these other powers, right? I'm giving you this particular prerogative, right? The other thing I wanted to say was the use of the word here, which is footnoted by the editors, of the word community, right? I'm trying to think what the more traditional translation would be. The traditional translation would be church. And I think the Greek is ecclesia, which is the Greek word for church. They translators use the word community because they're trying to harken back to the Hebrew kahal, which means the assembly of the people in the desert, the Hebrew people, right? So the church thinks of Israel before the coming of Christ as the church in the broader sense of the word, right? As the assembly of the people. Now that assembly is going to become fulfilled, right, in the person of Jesus, and then it's going to be extended to all mankind. What I wanted to say about that, of course, in the thinking now occurring, I would use the word society, to say. But what I like, this is just a little trick. I mean, it's a trick that I didn't invent. It's there in the language. Is that if the church, ecclesia means, there's the ek, notice the ek, and the ecclesia is called out, called from, and if the church is the gathering of those who are ecclesia, this is ek to cosmo, from the world, then the church is the body of whose members are those who have been called beyond the world. You see? And yet, going back to the apostolic mark, those are real people. And my relationship to them is got to be historically concrete and real through whatever link of free links are created by this non-chain of embodiments historically. Right? All right, we'll stop there because we pushed the clock.
What's the controversy about this?
Well, because, I even hate to mention it, it's associated with the peculiar claims of something called Roman Catholicism. You see? But that's a topic for another day. Sarah?
Yeah, Dave, what's the name of the Ratzinger book that you...
The one I was referencing is Eschatology and Death. It's listed on the syllabus.
It's the one that's listed on the syllabus.
There are several listed on the syllabus. That's one of them, yes. Eschatology and Death.